mean, this is the major strategic loss of having started the war, which every military planner, Republican, Democratic expert who had cautioned against, is by starting this war and ceding essentially Iran with dominion over the strait in terms of its ability to deter shipping through the threat of the use of force. We have forever changed the nature of the oil business, of trade through the Strait of Hormuz, and the strategic vulnerability of the Gulf economies.
US forces are carrying out a third night of strikes on Iran. President Trump is talking about it now at the Oval Office. Let's have a listen to what he's been saying.
We're helping. For instance, you look at the 5 countries. You have Saudi Arabia, you have UAE, you have Qatar, or Qatar as I always say, you have Qatar, Bahrain, and by the way, you have others. You have Kuwait, and you have others, and they will do very well. But we think it's appropriate that we don't need them. You know, we have more oil than any other country in the world. When you add Venezuela, which has been amazing, which has tremendous amounts of oil that we control, when you add Venezuela and everything else, we have more than 50% of the world's supply. We don't need it, but we need it from the standpoint of protecting allies, et cetera, including Israel, including Saudi Arabia, including Qatar, including UAE. We're protecting all of them, and we've done a very effective job. So 4 months ago, these people had military that was very strong, by far the strongest probably in the Middle East. They were called the bully of the Middle East. Now they don't have a Navy. They have 159 ships underwater. They had a total of 159 ships. Now every one of them is underwater. They had 230 airplanes, attack planes. They're all gone. They're gone. They had tremendous radar. It's all gone. They had tremendous anti-aircraft. It's all gone. Sadly, their leadership is all gone. They had their first-tier leaders are all dead. Their second-tier leaders are all dead. Their third-tier leaders, who we're dealing with, more or less, some of them are already gone. And then you read fake news like your network, CNN, which is fake news. You read them, you have them say, well, actually, aren't they doing quite well? Let me just tell you, they have now inflation of over 300.
That was President Trump speaking a little earlier. He also announced in a post on Truth Social that the US would reinstate its blockade of Iranian ports, become the guardian of the waterway, but would charge shipping 20%. Let's talk to Behnam Taleblu, who is Senior Director of the Iran Programme at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Good evening to you, Behnam.
Good evening. Great to be with you.
Great to have you with us. Look, we were hearing there from President Trump talking about the latest action which the US forces are taking against Iran tonight, saying that the action was in order to protect allies because the US doesn't actually need the supplies that come through the Strait of Hormuz, talking about the damage inflicted on Iran. But where does all of this leave the control of the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. The question is one that could be posed to the Islamic Republic as much as it could be posed to the President of the United States, because the ball is equally in both their courts. The question is how much time, assets, interest, political capital, resources will Iran and America put into a protracted conflict over the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians might be betting that there are real limitations on the president's side to be able to carry out the vision. Now, I don't think that the president is going to be able to extract taxes or tariffs from Arab states in the Persian Gulf when it comes to oil exports and controlling the strait, but I do expect more American military involvement in the region, involvement that will actually be regulated and potentially even offset by the fact that 3 days ago, the administration just notified Congress of another 60-day window pursuant to the War Powers Resolution for military operations against the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly bode well for the chances of any solution to this. Do you accept, though, that this latest upsurge in fighting essentially began, perhaps even was provoked, when the Iranians attacked 3 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz because they weren't essentially following Iranian instructions about the route and the timing that they could take?
I believe that's precisely the causal pattern that got us into the latest round of violence. Now, some may have questions or concerns, or even about the Trump administration's intentions for the future of the memorandum of understanding after the 60-day period it was supposed to be in force. But there's no doubt the Islamic Republic literally looked a gift horse in the mouth. The Trump administration, the architect of maximum pressure sanctions, had issued, pursuant to the deal, a memorandum of understanding and general license X that waived not one or two, but 11 different sanctions regimes that were tied to Iran oil sanctions to allow Iran to export oil, to be able to repatriate revenue and even get that revenue in US dollars. And still this regime felt the need to essentially curb stomp the Arab states of the Persian Gulf and fire on those ships. And in so doing, it is forcing the president's hand into a greater cycle of violence.
But nonetheless, when we have President Trump making this announcement saying that the US are going to be the guardians of the Strait of Hormuz, essentially they're going to control it, he's saying, and they are going to reimpose the blockade of Iranian ports. They are going to dictate shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz. And furthermore, they're going to charge companies 20% of the value of their cargoes. I mean, doesn't that fly in the face of the whole purpose of this, which the US had said, is that there should be free movement through this waterway? And that is clearly something which those Gulf states surrounding that waterway are very keen indeed to see, that this is an international shipping lane, not one that should be controlled by anyone.
Precisely. Do I believe that everything the president said in the Truth Social post that contained the news of the blockade and the alleged tariffs will come to fruition? No, I do not. Do I believe every element is political? Yes, I absolutely do. And we've seen this tariff threat from the president be used very diversely, some would even say creatively, against allies and adversaries alike in Europe, Asia, and elsewhere in the world, and has actually given other actors an opportunity to find ways to bilaterally get around it. The Japanese come to mind, the Vietnamese come to mind, even the United Kingdom comes to mind. But here, I think the most important part is to not miss the signal for the noise. And the signal is the blockade. The blockade is America's greatest non-kinetic tool to be able to get the Islamic Republic's oil exports, the thing that funds its war machine, to take a nosedive. The previous blockade caused a 90% nosedive in Iran's crude oil exports from the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. And it actually created the conditions, if America was willing to follow through, to have safe passage for the Arab states, which are major energy exporters. And do I think that the president is potentially conflating these two? Yes, I do, meaning freedom of navigation operations and the blockade. But do I think the most important thing is the restoration of the blockade? Yes, it is. And that's why Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, when it is allegedly going to be restored, that's when all eyes will really have to be on the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, perhaps more so than at any other point in 2026.
And when you see what's happening there, when we hear again of a third consecutive night of US attacks on Iran, the extension of those war powers going through Congress, I mean, where does any of this leave? Well, I won't describe it as a peace deal because it was only ever a memorandum of understanding. But the whole idea was that there was due to be a ceasefire for 60 days to iron out some of the major outstanding issues. Where does this leave that process?
It leaves that process precisely where it was, which was flailing in the wind. But it is one that nonetheless can be resurrected. I mean, let's make sure that we have the full picture here. There was the 40-day war from late February up until April 8th. There was the U.S. blockade, there was the Iranian responses, and there was a 67-day period of ceasefire before the MOU was actually agreed to and later put into effect that did look, quite frankly, nothing like a ceasefire. And that element of looking nothing like a ceasefire limped along into the MOU, and I have no doubt will limp along at least into the short term up until November, when one of the big things potentially constraining the president, the midterm elections and the political impact and fallout that it could have, will come to fruition. So this is a new normal, unfortunately, that we're seeing in the short term in this part of the world, a new normal that is economically, politically, strategically, and morally costly for all involved.
Behnam Taleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Programme at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Really good to get your insight. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, let's bring in David Goldwyn, who is a former US State Department Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs. Good evening to you, David.
Good evening. Good to be with you again.
Great to have you with us. Even before the latest round of attacks tonight, we saw oil prices rising sharply. What do you make of what President Trump has been saying, in particular this idea that the US is going to be the guardians of the Strait of Hormuz and is going to be charging shipping to pass through it?
Well, first, I would say the fundamental problem here is that the memorandum of understanding never reached an understanding with respect to who would manage navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. And the U.S. believed that it had won free passage without charge, and Iran believed that it had won an Iranian-Omani, privilege of negotiating how the strait would be determined. And that misunderstanding got clarified when Iran started firing missiles at ships that were going through the Omani route. So I think where we are is we're back to the status quo ante, and with you raised two issues. One is the blockade. Now we're back to where Iran will no longer be able to export 1 to 2 million barrels a day of oil. Most of that was going to China. The same with some of the products that were coming out of there. That will have a mild upward pressure on oil prices. This business about being the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz, I think conflates a couple of issues. First, to put it in its most optimistic light, perhaps what the president is saying is that he would like contribution to the U.S. effort to try to provide safe passage to ships through the Strait of Hormuz from our allies. Gulf War I, Gulf War II, we got those kinds of contributions by sending ambassadors privately to countries to request support for the defense of those countries. That's not what this is, where you have a tweet essentially making a unilateral demand. So the demand itself, charging the toll, illegal under international law, according to U.S. sources as well. This is, no right to charge a toll. It's 16 times what the Iranians were trying to extort from shippers. He has managed to unite the Gulf Arabs and the Iranians in opposition to this policy. Nobody wants to pay for this, but it could be that the president's impulsive language is obscuring another issue, which is that he'd like a contribution for what is proving to be a very expensive, long-term, and somewhat ineffective operation.
And as you say there, not just the Iranians unhappy about this, but those Gulf states around that Strait of Hormuz also objecting, because their whole aim throughout all of this has been to have free shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Isn't the fact of the matter that when we look at what's going on, the Americans again striking at Iranian targets, whatever President Trump or anyone else says, no shipping company is going to want to take the risk at the moment, especially after you've had Iranian attacks on ships and now you've got US strikes going on in the region.
No, absolutely. If the U.S. was able to militarily provide safe passage for ships over Iranian objections, we wouldn't have needed a memorandum of understanding. We wouldn't have needed a ceasefire. We wouldn't have given a general license to Iran. We wouldn't have given them the right to pick up $5 billion over the last few weeks by free transit. But the reality is that we do not have the ability to provide safe passage by military means. We can certainly punish the Iranians. We can try and attack missile sites. We can try and attack drone factories, but they only have to hit one ship. We have to take out all of those offensive measures, and that has proven impossible to do. So that's why we're back where we were before. We're going to hit some sites. We're going to have a rhetorical war. And my guess is that, as your previous speaker said, we're going to see a lot of fight and talk. The president and the administration will try to talk down oil prices and talk up the market by saying we're back to negotiating, that we are going to have this worked out. It's going to be a great deal, the best deal anyone's ever seen, until the Iranians say, no, we don't actually have a deal, and we're going to go back to fighting. So it's going to be up and down through the election. President trying to disguise the fact that we're not able to provide that safe passage, and therefore we're going to have elevated oil prices, gasoline prices, diesel prices, helium prices, and microchip prices, at least through the end of the year.
Well, which is what I was going to ask you about. I mean, if you've got this situation we are effectively back to this situation where you're going to have hundreds more ships just waiting there in the Strait of Hormuz, and that shortage of supplies is going to have significant effects, not just in the US, which is clearly something that Donald Trump is concerned about, though he dismisses that, but in many other parts of the world as well.
No, that's right. And before the MOU, we were thinking that July was when the chickens were going to come home to roost, when, despite the market optimism, we would start to see physical shortages in South Asia and in East Asia. And already we're seeing very limited squeeze, limited supplies of diesel, jet fuel, helium, and other products. So we got a bit of a pause on that because the Iranians got to export, I guess, about 680 ships got through the strait. And so we got a little bit of relief. But now come August, we're going to be back where we were. We don't have any of the buffers which prevented oil, gas, and other prices from rising before. We've largely deployed our strategic reserves. Commercial inventories have been depleted. They weren't able to be restocked. Fields have not been able to be restarted. And so come August, early September, probably at the latest, we're going to be seeing, some real physical shortages in some parts of the world. And already in Europe, you're seeing LNG prices bid up as the U.S. competes with, not the U.S., as Europe competes with Asia for LNG supplies. You're at, 50 euros a megawatt hour now. So you're going to have the inflationary effects and what economists politely call demand destruction, which is going to be, decreased economic activity in most of the world that relies on imports from the Gulf.
Do you think that essentially, when it comes to this, President Trump has been outmaneuvered by the Iranians? Because, as you say, they've only got to carry out a comparatively small-scale attack on one or two tankers and continue to do so. And they can continue to impose the sort of economic damage that you've just described.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the major strategic loss of having started the war, which every military planner, Republican, Democratic expert who had cautioned against, is by starting this war and ceding essentially Iran with dominion over the strait in terms of its ability to deter shipping through the threat of the use of force. We have forever changed the nature of the oil business, of trade through the Strait of Hormuz, and the strategic vulnerability of the Gulf economies. 5 years from now, there'll be bypass routes and other places for them to go. But for the next year, we've really lost this, and we're talking about managing the consequences.
And finally, just briefly, if you can, I mean, we're seeing these reports here in the UK that one of the big Dubai port owners, Dubai's DP World, is planning a new East Coast port to bypass the Hormuz Strait. I mean, however fast they build, that's not going to happen anytime soon, is it? But that seems to be the sort of action which those Gulf states are embarked on.
There will be adaptation, but as you say, it won't happen quickly. The importance of the Strait of Hormuz will decrease every day that this conflict continues as people either substitute fuels or try to find other routes. My worry, though, is escalation at this point, because Iran has the ability to escalate by activating the Houthis and creating trouble in the Red Sea, where you could have essentially the bypass routes threatened by Houthi forces there. That's a card they haven't played yet, but they have that. And they have the ability to escalate because they don't have to worry about punishing their domestic population. The RGC doesn't care, frankly, whether the Iranian people are experiencing extreme privation. But the American public cares about gasoline prices and diesel prices and food prices. And that's where the president is vulnerable. And that's why he's going to need to negotiate, and he's going to need to find a way to deal with this political mess that he's created for himself. I just don't think he can get it done by November, and I think the election will be largely a vote of no confidence on his foreign policy and the war in Iran.
And that is certainly an issue which we could discuss a great deal more, but we're out of time. David Goldwyn, former US State Department Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs. Really great to speak to you tonight. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Carole. Thank you.
Dominic says one key trouble Trump has is that he doesn't understand the memorandum of understanding. It's all memorandum and no understanding.